The Dodge Tomahawk weighs 1,500 pounds and it has two wheels. Well, sort of. Let me back up. Because this thing doesn't fit into any category you already know. It's not a motorcycle, it's not a car. The US government couldn't even figure out what to call it, which is part of why it was never allowed on a public road. It was sold through a luxury retailer best known for selling fur coats and diamond jewelry. And the people who bought it were told, up front, that they should not ride it. They paid $555,000 anyway. That price tag isn't even the wild part. The wild part is what lives under that sculpted aluminium body. It's a 10-cylinder engine from a Dodge Viper. 8.3 litres of it, stuffed into something with handlebars, 500 horsepower, on a motorcycle. That's where we start today. Here's the thing about the early 2000s American car industry. Chrysler was in a weird place. The Daimler-Chrysler merger in 1998 had looked like a bold move on paper, and by 2003 there was enormous internal pressure to prove the company still had an identity, that it still had an American pulse, that it wasn't just a German subsidiary with a ram's head badge on the grille. The big auto shows had become a war, not just a war of cars, but a war of noise, of attention. Ford would show up with something, GM would show up with something bigger, and Chrysler needed to do something that nobody in that building that week would be able to stop talking about. They didn't show up with a car. They showed up with this. The Tomahawk rolled onto the stage at the 2003 North American International Auto Show in Detroit, with Chrysler's COO Wolfgang Bernhard literally riding it, not pushing it, riding it, in a suit, in front of the world's press, and the room just stopped. But here's what nobody could quite agree on afterward. Was this a vehicle? Was this art? Was this marketing? Could it actually do what Dodge was claiming? And if it could, what exactly does 300 miles per hour feel like on something with handlebars and a 3.25-gallon fuel tank? We're going to find out. Or at least, we're going to get as close as anyone ever has. Before we go any further, let me set the scene on where this machine came from, because understanding Dodge in this era explains a lot about why the Tomahawk exists at all. Dodge, by 2003, was the muscle arm of Chrysler. It was the brand that built the Viper, that built the Ram. The brand that didn't do subtle. Its entire identity was built around excess, displacement over efficiency, drama over refinement. If you wanted understated German engineering, you went to the other side of the Daimler-Chrysler building. But even by Dodge's standards, the Tomahawk was deranged in the best possible way. And it started, as the best automotive ideas often do, not in a boardroom. It started with two guys who had no business pitching something this insane. Bob Schroeder was a modeler in Chrysler's design office. He also rode motorcycles. Dave Cheers was a vehicle build specialist and a drag racer. Between them, they cooked up the idea of putting a Viper engine on a motorcycle frame and somehow got it in front of the right people. Chrysler's leadership didn't shut it down. They said, build it. From that decision to a running, rideable vehicle took 6 months. The design work went to Chrysler staff designer Mark Walters, who sketched the whole thing out around the Viper V10 as a central element, not something to be hidden, but something to be celebrated. The fabrication was handed to a specialist shop in Wixom, Michigan called RM Motorsports, the kind of place that builds one-of-a-kind parts for vintage race cars. A man named Kurt Bennett turned Walter's sketches into metal reality and in the process developed a brand new patented suspension system that had never existed before. This wasn't a show model. This was a working machine. Let's talk about what this thing actually looks like in person, because photographs don't do it justice in either direction. The Tomahawk is 102 inches long. That's 8.5 feet, which puts it in the same ballpark as a large touring motorcycle. Width is 27.7 inches. Height is just 36.9 inches, which is low. Very low. The seat height is 29 inches, so even shorter riders can get both feet flat on the ground, which is a deliberate design decision we'll come back to. Wheelbase is 76 inches, and here's where it starts to get strange. Between the front pair of wheels, the track, that's the distance from wheel center to wheel center, is just 8.75 inches. The rear is 10 inches. So the two front wheels are closer together than the width of an adult's shoulders. Same at the back. From a distance, it genuinely reads as 2 wheels. Get up close, and you realize it's 4. Ground clearance is 3 inches. That's not a typo. 3 inches. The entire belly of this machine, with its radiators and chain drives and exhaust, sits 3 inches from the ground. You'd bottom out on a speed bump. And then, the weight. 1,500 pounds. To give that some context, a Harley-Davidson Road King, one of the heaviest production motorcycles on the market, tips the scales at about 820 pounds. The Tomahawk is nearly double that. 625 of those 1,500 pounds is the engine alone. The engine weighs more than most motorcycles. The fuel tank holds 3.25 gallons, which means at any sort of reasonable throttle position, you're looking at a very short ride. Though given everything else about this machine, range was clearly not the design brief. The design language Walters went for is described as Art Deco. And when you look at it, that's exactly right. There's a heaviness to the curves, a machine-age quality to the polished aluminium bodywork. It doesn't look like a concept car from 2003. It looks like something from a 1940s vision of the future. All exposed metal, ram air intakes feeding the engine directly, and twin LED headlamps at the front that physically move as the wheels steer. That last detail is the kind of thing you notice and can't unnotice. The lights track with the suspension, not with the handlebars, with the wheels. Inside, and I use that term loosely because the Tomahawk is almost entirely open, the cockpit is stripped back to almost nothing. There's a single saddle, narrow and low, billet aluminium handlebars, handbrake levers machined from the same stock. There's no dashboard in any conventional sense, no instrument cluster, no screens, no infotainment. What you get instead is the engine, right there, between your knees, filling your entire field of vision below the handlebars. 10 cylinders, valve covers polished to a mirror finish, the intake manifold visible from the rider's position. It's one of those rare vehicles where the inside of the thing is as important as the outside. Most concept bikes bury the engine under bodywork, let the shape do the talking. Walters made the opposite call. The engine is the interior, it's the dashboard, it's the art. Every time you look down, you're looking at 505 cubic inches of American V10. The exhausts exit centrally at the rear, equal-length tubular stainless steel headers with dual collectors, and they sit right behind the rider. You don't just hear this thing start, you feel it. Wolfgang Bernhard said at the Detroit reveal, "A motorcycle is the most beautiful way to showcase an engine." Standing astride the Tomahawk with that V10 between your legs and nothing between you and the road, you completely understand what he meant. Right. Let's talk about the engine, because this is the whole story. The unit at the heart of the Tomahawk is the 8.3-litre SRT 10V10 from the third-generation Dodge Viper. 10 cylinders arranged in a 90-degree V, liquid-cooled, 505 cubic inches of displacement, 8,277 cubic centimeters, aluminium block with cast-iron cylinder liners, aluminium cylinder heads, pushrod-actuated overhead valves, 2 per cylinder with roller-type hydraulic lifters, sequential multi-point fuel injection, output 500 horsepower at 5,600 revolutions per minute, 525 pound-feet of torque, that's 712 Newton meters, arriving at 4,200 revolutions per minute. Now, context. In the Viper, that engine sits in a 3,400 pound car and pushes it to about 190 miles per hour. A Dodge engineer at the time made the comparison very simply. If a 3,400 pound car goes 190 on this engine, a 1,500 pound machine on the same engine should, in theory, go much faster. That logic is where the famous speed claims came from. Because Dodge did claim speeds, several of them confusingly, simultaneously. The January 2003 press release said nearly 400 miles per hour. Later communications said 300 miles per hour. One press release managed to include both figures on the same page. Cycle World's John Phillips pointed out, with some amusement, that Cadillac unveiled its 16 concept, a V16 making 1,000 horsepower, just 50 yards across the same show floor. By Dodge's own logic, that car should have been capable of 800 miles per hour. The point is, 300 or 400 miles per hour were never real numbers. They were theoretical projections based on power-to-weight ratios and gearing, applied to a machine that was never aero-tested, never dyno-confirmed at speed, and physically couldn't be ridden above 100 miles per hour in internal testing without the stability becoming questionable. More on that in a moment. But the power-to-weight ratio is still extraordinary. 1,500 pounds, 500 horsepower. That's a ratio of 3.3 pounds per horsepower. To compare, a Ferrari 812 Superfast comes in at around 5.9 pounds per horsepower. A Kawasaki H2R, the most powerful production motorcycle ever made, is around 2.7 pounds per horsepower. The Tomahawk sits right in between those two extremes, on something you straddle. The engineers made one critical modification to the Viper engine before it could live in the Tomahawk. They converted it from a wet sump oiling system to a dry sump system. In a wet sump engine, the oil sits in a pan beneath the crankshaft. That works fine in a car. In something this low to the ground with this kind of power, it creates problems. Oil surge under hard acceleration, and a sump pan that would scrape the ground every time you breathe on it. The dry sump conversion moved the oil reservoir to the front of the bike under the ram air intake. That allowed the engine to sit lower in the chassis, dropping the center of gravity and making the whole thing slightly more plausible as a rideable vehicle. Cooling for a 8.3-litre V10 on something this small is, as you might imagine, not straightforward. Walters and the RM Motorsports team solved it with twin aluminium radiators mounted directly atop the engine's intake manifolds. They're not fed by forward motion. A belt-driven turbine fan sits at the front of the vehicle and forces air through the system. That fan is visible from the front. It sits right where you'd expect a headlight to be on a conventional bike. It's one of the details that makes the Tomahawk look like it came from another planet. The transmission is a 2-speed sequential gearbox, foot-shifted, aluminium-cased, dog-ring engagement with straight-cut gears. First gear ratio is 18 to 38, second is 23 to 25. That second gear ratio is almost 1-to-1, which tells you the gearbox is built purely for top-end velocity. There's no third gear for cruising. There's no overdrive for motorway miles. There are 2 gears, launch and go. The clutch is a double-disc dry plate unit with organic friction materials operated by hand lever. And power reaches the road through 2 separate 110 link motorcycle-style chains, one per rear wheel. The front sprockets carry 14 teeth. The rear sprockets carry 35. Each chain operates completely independently, which is critical to understanding how the rear suspension works. Start this engine. Depending on which account you believe, either a deep, chest-compressing rumble or clouds of blue smoke and a sound you could feel in your back teeth. Probably both. The Allpar website describes seeing it started and revved at the Detroit show. Clouds of blue smoke vied for attention with the throaty rumble of the mighty V10. The twin throttle body blades, mounted up front, visible where a headlight would normally sit on a motorcycle, opened visibly when someone hit the gas. It didn't sound shrill, it sounded geological. The suspension system on the Tomahawk is where the story gets genuinely interesting from an engineering standpoint, because this is where Bob Schroeder and Dave Chizzy's mad idea ran straight into a wall of physics, and Mark Walters had to invent a solution that didn't exist yet. The problem: 4 wheels, 2 front, 2 rear. To lean in corners like a motorcycle, both front wheels need to lean together, in sync at the same angle. Both rear wheels need to do the same. But each wheel also needs to handle road imperfections independently, or the ride and the handling would be terrible. RM Motorsport's Kurt Bennett developed a brand new patented swing arm suspension that solved this. Each wheel has its own independent swing arm. But the 2 front swing arms are mechanically linked, so they lean in unison. Same at the rear. The result is that all 4 wheels maintain contact with the ground through a corner, while the whole machine tilts like a motorcycle. According to computer modeling, the suspension geometry allows a lean angle of up to 45 degrees before one of the swing arms contacts the ground. Whether anyone has actually approached 45 degrees on this machine is another question entirely. Steering is where the Tomahawk reveals its limitations most honestly. The system uses dual hub center steering, a linkage of rocker arms and push/pull rods with roller bearings, operating a billet aluminium steering yoke with aluminium grips. It looks extraordinary, but the lock-to-lock steering range is only 20 degrees either side of center, 20 degrees total travel. Motorcyclist magazine's Jeff Carr described the turning radius as only a little tighter than an SR-71. That's a spy plane. He was not exaggerating for comic effect. What this means in practice: you could theoretically ride the Tomahawk in a straight line. You could theoretically change lanes. Making a U-turn in a car park is essentially out of the question. The machine isn't designed for city streets, it's designed for runways. One genuinely clever piece of engineering is the rear suspension lock. The 2 rear wheels can be hydraulically locked relative to each other, holding their position so the bike stands upright on its own. No kickstand, no side stand. The suspension itself holds it up. It's a neat solution to the problem of parking something 1,500 pounds on 2 wheels. The brakes are large, and they need to be. There are disc brakes front and rear, operated through hand levers. Given that this machine is theoretically capable of generating enormous speed from a standstill in 2.5 seconds, 0 to 60 in around 2.5 seconds per Dodge's own testing, the brakes need to handle serious thermal loads. The braking system is, like everything else here, custom engineered. There were no off-the-shelf parts that fit. The electrical system runs from a 136-amp high-speed alternator and a 600C CA maintenance-free battery. The headlamps consist of 12 individual 5-watt LEDs at the front, with beam-modifying optics and masked lenses, and here's the detail again. They physically articulate with the wheels. When the wheels steer, the lights steer. The rears use 8 LEDs. For a vehicle officially described as display only, the lighting system got a lot of engineering attention. The chassis itself is monocoque billet aluminium, and the engine is a load-bearing stressed member of that structure. It's not sitting in a frame, it is part of the frame. Remove the engine, and the chassis loses structural integrity. That's a common arrangement in racing, but doing it on something this heavy, with this much torque, trying to tear the whole thing apart, required the kind of precision machining that RM Motorsports does for vintage racing cars. The bodywork, to the extent that there is any, is hand-formed aluminium. The panels are minimal. The intent was always to reveal the engineering, not hide it. There's no fairing, no windscreen, no aerodynamic rider protection of any kind. Which brings us back to the top speed question. A motorcycle-style rider, upright, wearing leathers and a helmet, creates an enormous amount of drag at high speed. The Hayabusa, the benchmark for high-speed production motorcycles, is wrapped in carefully developed bodywork specifically to manage that drag. The Tomahawk has none of it. At 150 miles per hour, the aerodynamic forces on a rider sitting completely exposed would be extraordinary. At 300, the physics are deeply unkind. Jeff's car at Motorcyclist put it plainly. At those speeds, aerodynamic lift would likely pull the rider clean off the machine. The Tomahawk's 300 miles per hour number assumed a world where aerodynamics didn't exist. They do, none of which makes it any less spectacular. It just makes it honest. So, 9 of these exist. Maybe fewer. The exact number is still debated. They were sold through the Neiman Marcus Christmas catalog in 2004 at $555,000 each. Neiman Marcus, to be clear, is a luxury department store. You could order a Tomahawk the same way you'd order a cashmere jumper. Dodge officially described the units for sale as automotive sculpture intended for display only. Not street legal, not track legal. Legally, not really anything other than very expensive art. And yet, the Tomahawk is one of those machines that matters precisely because it wasn't trying to be practical, it was trying to be a statement. Trevor Creed, Chrysler's senior VP of design at the time, called it a bold-faced slap against mediocrity. That line has aged well. Industry observers almost universally agreed that whatever the Tomahawk was, it worked. It worked as theatre. It worked as branding. It dominated the 2003 Detroit show, despite Cadillac bringing a V16 limousine to the same event. It generated more media coverage than anything else Chrysler showed that year. And here's what's genuinely interesting about where the Tomahawk sits in automotive history. It arrived at a moment when car companies were trying to figure out how to make people care again. Not just buyers, the general public. People who weren't shopping for a vehicle, but might talk about one. The Tomahawk was probably the purest example of a concept vehicle built entirely for cultural impact. It was never going to go into production. It was never going to be ridden to 300 miles per hour. It was always going to live in someone's foyer under a glass case. But the conversation it started about what a motorcycle can be, about where the line between vehicle and sculpture sits, about whether a company with German ownership still had American audacity. That conversation was real. And it ran for years. The 9 Tomahawks that exist today are, by all accounts, in private collections and museums. No independent road tests have ever been published. The highest confirmed speed achieved in any testing is 100 miles per hour. Everything above that is conjecture, which might be the most honest thing about the whole project. Dodge built something whose top speed could never be verified, and nobody really minded, because the number was never the point. The point was the engine. The point was the V10 between your knees. The point was Wolfgang Bernhard riding it onto a stage in Detroit in 2003, while the world's automotive press stood up out of their chairs. The point was that for one moment in a very crowded building, absolutely nothing else in the room mattered. Is it a motorcycle? No. Is it a car? Also no. Is it the most insane thing Dodge ever built? Probably yes. Is it worth $500,000 of someone's money to own a piece of machinery you can't legally ride anywhere? Surprisingly hard to argue against. Next time, we're staying on two wheels, but this one was never built to go fast. It was built to be worth $1 million. Stick around.